What's up, guys? So recently, someone has left a very good comment, so I decided to explain it in this video. His question was, do you use the wrist just a little bit, or is the wrist fixed? Before I answer the question, not only for this specific question, but for all questions, personally, I suggest that there are no right or wrong answers as long as your shot is working.
What are you talking about?
However, I would say there are more or less efficient ways to play the ball depending on your purpose. So the questions you want to ask yourself are, is my stroke efficient? Am I transferring the energy to the ball efficiently? Is my footwork efficient? Where am I losing my swing speed, and where can I gain my swing speed to have a better quality shots? Keep that in mind to answer any question you have. Again, it's about the efficiency of the shot. So let me reiterate the question here. What is the role of the wrist and how should it be used? First, the role of the wrist is to add a little spice at the contact to have more explosive speed on the swing that will give you faster and more spin on the ball. But to actually use the wrist and train it, I would recommend it only for high-level players who already know how to do most techniques consistently and are looking for ways to improve their shots. So I recommend either to fix the wrist and or to think about a concept where the wrist is used instead of use to the people who are starting out, including beginners and intermediate players. Even though it's impossible to divide into 3 skill levels of players, just to simplify, I'd like to divide into 3 stages: beginners, intermediate players, and advanced players. And depending on these stages, the wrist would be used differently. This is what I recommend for the forehand side. Stage 1. Beginners. Do not use the wrist. In the early learning process, it's very important to learn how to use the body and weight transfer in simple strokes to make sure that you have good fundamentals. If you try to use the wrist in this stage, you will end up focusing on the wrist instead of the body. So it distracts you from learning the use of the body and prevents you from developing your shots into more advanced techniques. So fix your wrist like a stiff wooden stick. Stage 2. Intermediate players. In this stage, you should have learned forehand, backhand drive, loop, smash, push, block, and etc. And also have some consistency and good weight transfer technique on your shots. It's time to learn the concept of the wrist being used, but not used yet. To do this, you need to loosen the wrist a little bit, but still keep the form. So when you move your arm quickly, the wrist has room to move, but it should return to its original form naturally. I like to name this technique as a whipping motion. Basically, you're learning to use the wrist like a whip. Stage 3. Advanced players. These are high-level players who are eager to train to improve their shots even more and finally need to think about using the wrist because it is the last extra spice that they can add to improve shots at the contact point. This is similar to the second stage, but you have better understanding of exactly how and when to use the wrist at the contact point to even bring additional swing speed. One tip of how to use the wrist is to understand the direction of the swing. The use of the wrist should follow through in the same direction as the swing. For backhand, whether you're a beginner or an advanced player, the role of the wrist is very important to have high quality backhand technique from the beginning. So I'll just divide into 2 groups. Early stage, where you're learning the fundamentals like drive, block, and push, and trained stage, where you're learning how to loop, punch, flick, and any other advanced techniques. So for the early stage, I would say do not try to fix the wrist when you're playing backhand, but rather loosen the wrist a little bit so it has room to be used as you play the ball. But still, minimize the use of the wrist because it's still important to understand and train your body and arm, especially forearm, for your backhand stroke. Then, for the trained stage, I recommend you to use the wrist like a whip to experience the explosive power. And one tip is that do not overuse the wrist, extend it all the way. Because 1, the speed doesn't come from the wider range of motion on the wrist. But when the wrist is used like a jab in boxing or like a whip, then you may get the explosive speed. And 2, you may get injured. If you injure your wrist, you really can't play table tennis anymore. And that's a nightmare. So remember to make it as compact as possible. This is my personal recommendation after teaching many beginners to advanced players for many years. So if your coach says use the wrist like this or that, don't say, oh, this guy on the YouTube told me not to use the wrist, so I'm not going to use it. Please, don't say that. If your coach says that, try to understand what he wants you to do. Thank you for watching this video and I hope you have learned something in this video.